Imagine this. You're living in your 20s in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, America. You don't have much money, and every day feels like the same endless grind. Taking care of your partner, raising the kids, cooking, cleaning. Life is repetitive, mundane. And then one day, someone new in town approaches you. They're an FBI agent, and they need your help as an informant. They're offering you $5,000 for your time. It's dangerous work. You're ratting out big-time criminals to the feds. But it's also exciting. A break from a break from your usual grind. Would you take the job? This is the choice Susan Daniel Smith made in the late 1980s. A decision that would change her life forever, but not in the way she'd hoped. What began as a chance for a little extra cash and a thrilling escape from her small town life ended with betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately her tragic death. In a twist, the man who took her life wasn't the dangerous criminal she was working to take down. It was the FBI agent she trusted the most. Today's episode of Murder Monday, we're headed to Freeburn, Kentucky, a tiny coal mining town with a population of just 296 people as of 2020. But in the 60s, it was home to Susan Daniels and her family. Born the fifth of 9 children, Susan grew up in a small, impoverished household. Her father worked in the local coal mines, an industry in decline at the time, until an injury forced him out of work, leaving the family to survive on welfare. Life was hard. 2 kids to a bed, a tiny black and white TV with only 3 stations, and a single coal stove to heat the entire home. Despite the challenges, Susan was bright, popular, and well-adjusted. She loved reading, learning, and hanging out with her friends. But like many young girls growing up in small-town poverty, Susan dreamed of escaping her circumstances. That opportunity seemed to come in 1977 when Susan, just 15, met Kenneth Smith, a 22-year-old bad boy who swept her off her feet. He had his own trailer, a motorcycle, cowboy boots, and a reputation as the local drug dealer. To Susan, he seemed like her ticket out. It didn't take long for Kenneth to convince Susan to drop out of high school and help him run his drug dealing business, which included everything from marijuana to PCP, cocaine, and acid. The thrill of making money and getting high gave Susan a new sense of freedom. For the first time in her life, she had cash for clothes, makeup, and jewelry. And in 1981, when Susan was 20, the two eloped. They didn't tell her family. They wouldn't have approved. But Susan didn't care. She was head over heels. In March 1982, Susan gave birth to the couple's first child, a little girl named Miranda. But as often happens in stories like this, the dream didn't last. Kenneth gave up drug dealing and got a construction job. But when he fell off a roof and was injured and could no longer work, instead, the couple found themselves on welfare. It wasn't long before Kenneth turned to pain pills and became emotionally abusive. By 1984, Susan had enough and filed for divorce. But even after their divorce was finalized in 1985, the two couldn't seem to stay apart. Susan was pregnant with her second child, and while they remained divorced on paper, they continued living together as a family. Meanwhile, in 1987, someone new moved to Pikeville, Kentucky, about 45 minutes from Freeburn. His name was Mark Putnam, a 27-year-old rookie FBI agent from Connecticut. Mark had big dreams of climbing the FBI ladder and making a name for himself. His first assignment, investigating corruption, drug trafficking, and a string of big robberies in Pikeville, a job that would soon bring him face-to-face with Susan. The robberies were the work of a repeat offender named Carl Cat Eyes Lockhart, an ex-convict who had recently been released from prison. Carl was staying with old friends in the area, none other than Susan and Kenneth Smith. Though Susan and Kenneth knew Carl was back to his old ways, they didn't mind. He paid rent, helped around the house, and made Kenneth easier to live with. What they didn't realize was that Carl's presence in their home put them directly under FBI surveillance. When Mark and his partner couldn't find enough evidence to nail Carl, they came up with a new plan: recruit an informant. Kenneth was the first choice, but after he demanded a weekly salary, Mark turned his attention to Susan. In the summer of '87, Mark convinced her to meet him in a parking lot to discuss the job. Susan was hesitant. She knew the risks of working with the feds, but she was also intrigued by Mark. Clean-cut and charismatic. He wasn't like anyone she'd ever met. Flattered by his attention, Susan agreed to become an informant. Over the next several months, Susan and Mark met regularly to exchange information, but it wasn't just intel they were exchanging. Their relationship quickly turned romantic. They began meeting in secret locations where they would talk and then sleep together. For Susan, Mark represented something she'd never had: excitement, protection, and a way out of her small-town life. For Mark, Susan was not only a valuable informant, but also a dangerous temptation. Their affair was a violation of FBI rules and a threat to his career, but he didn't stop. With Susan's help, Mark was able to take down Carl Locker, who was arrested and sentenced to 57 years in prison. But Susan's testimony at the trial made her a target. She started receiving threats and begged Mark for protection. Mark, however, wasn't ready to let her go. He kept using her for more stings, all while continuing their affair. Susan fell deeper for Mark, even fantasizing about a future together. But Mark had no intention of leaving his wife, Kathy. Instead, he strung Susan along, making empty promises while using her to further his career. By 1989, Susan discovered she was pregnant with Mark's child. He told him he was furious. He denied the baby was his and began distancing himself from her. In June 1989, Mark returned to Pikeville for one final meeting with Susan. They argued in his car, and when Susan threatened to expose the affair and his role in her pregnancy, Mark snapped. He strangled her in a fit of rage, killing her and the unborn child. He dumped her body in a ravine and returned to his life. Nothing had happened. Susan's disappearance sparked a months-long investigation. Her sister, Shelby, fought tirelessly to keep the case alive, even as law enforcement seemed reluctant to pursue it. For a while, Mark escaped suspicion, protected by his position in the FBI. Eventually, the pressure became too much. In 1990, Mark confessed to killing Susan, leading investigators to her remains. He was sentenced to just 16 years, served only 10 years before being released in 2000. Today, Mark Putnam lives as a free man. Susan Daniel Smith, the woman who trusted him to protect her, is gone. Her life cut short by the very person who was supposed to be her ally. It's a chilling reminder of how betrayal can come from the unlikeliest of places, and how justice doesn't always feel like justice at all. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below on this case. Do you think Mark Putnam should have remained in prison, or do you think it was fair that he was released? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Of course, give us a thumbs up if you like our video. Hit that subscribe button down below. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. As always, your support helps the channel grow, upgrade our equipment, bring new hosts, be able to pay them, and eventually take this show on the road. As always, you can find us on all major podcast platforms, Spotify, Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts from. And if you listen on Good Pods or Spotify, be sure to leave us a review and give us your thoughts of the podcast as a whole. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.